if you are doing this in a classroom, you should try to plan to have them hatch during the week because
Absolutely.
I can only imagine the confusion. You leave Friday and you come Monday, and then you have chicks running around, and the kids are like, "Did you just buy these?"
The very first time we did it at the school, I counted wrong, and I counted wrong by, like, 2 days. I don't know how I did that. So, yes, it's been done. You will make a mistake, and you will learn very valuable lesson in the faces that are like, "Well, when did they hatch?" And you'll see their faces. So, yes, make sure you count appropriately and double count, even triple count your dates before you set your eggs.
Welcome to the Mother Earth News and Friends podcast. At Mother Earth News, for 50 years and counting, we've been dedicated to conserving the planet's natural resources while helping you conserve your financial resources. In this podcast, we host conversations with experts in the fields of sustainability, homesteading, natural health, and more to share all about how you can live well wherever you are in a way that values both people and our Mother Earth. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, Brinzy. That's BRINSEA, Chick Incubation Specialists. They've been focusing on egg incubator design continuously since 1976, resulting in egg incubators, chick brooders, and incubation accessories. They offer unparalleled practicality, reliability, superior hatch rates, and healthy chicks. Innovation you can trust.
Good day, everyone. I am Kenny Coogan, and joining me is Assetta Scott. Ann homesteads in Tennessee and regularly contributes to Backyard Poultry magazine. Today, we are talking about teaching kids about hatching chicks. Welcome to the podcast, Ann. And I know that we caught you mid-morning chores, which is very exciting.
Yeah, it's a busy time up until 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Can you tell the listeners some of the animals that you have on your homestead and farm?
Well, we are a truly fully functioning farm. Not only do we feed ourselves, but we take our provisions and sell it out to our local community as well too. So we raise non-GMO fed, pasture raised chickens and holiday turkeys. We also do raw milk off the property, CSA packages. You can purchase a half or a whole hog from us. The only thing we do not sell that we raise is our beef and our lamb. Those are just for private consumption only, unless you are part of the CSA package. And then at that point, it rotates between what we have available to add into the CSA.
So today we're going to be talking about teaching kids about hatching chicks. And hatching chicks is an exciting time for everyone, adults and children. And having
Yes.
kids help is a great social, emotional, and scientific journey. And I was a middle school agriculture and FFA advisor for many years. And I know that you can sneak in a lot of lessons when you're
Yes.
teaching kids about hatching chicks. So, and what ages do you like to include kids in helping out with hatching chicks?
Well, when we did it at the Hardinson Middle School down in Columbia, Tennessee, the ages there were anywhere from basically second grade up until sixth grade. So it's a one room schoolhouse. So that's how we function in that. But if you are talking on a private level, we've been hatching chicks for the last 10 years on our homestead. And so our children, Lola is, I guess Lola started, our last of seven is 16 next month. So since she was 6 years old. But that doesn't exclude toddlers from coming to learn and see, as well as, up until maybe your last child who's 14, 15, 16 is responsible for making sure the incubator is running properly. So at any age, basically.
And why should we teach kids about hatching chicks?
It's part of the lifestyle that we live, right? If we're homesteading or if we're farming or have a farmstead or anything like that, our lifestyle dictates that in order to continue with having the ability to have fresh eggs or a meat production or whatever the case is, that we want them to see from the start to the finish, especially if you don't have a broody hen. So if you don't have a broody hen, you are going to need to utilize an incubator. And we want the understanding that we are still going to be sufficient, in that sense of being able to raise what we want on our homesteads, but especially if are just hatching for laying production and things like that.
Now, earlier you mentioned, 14 to 16-year-olds helping with the incubator, and then you also mentioned some preschoolers
Yeah.
observing. So, what are some tasks or jobs that kids can do while watching or waiting for the eggs to hatch?
Prior to this journey of homesteading, prior to 10 years ago, I was a preschool teacher at a Christian private preschool. And so that age ranged from basically 2.5 on up. Okay. So, of course, the 2.5-year-olds didn't participate much, but we're talking about the basically anywhere from 4 to 5-year-olds. At the time, we only brought a little incubator into the preschool classrooms. So they had to check the humidity level. They had to check to make sure the eggs rotated based on the X's that we marked on each egg. And then from there, they had to fill the humidity water tank just to make sure of the water tank to make sure that the humidity level within the incubator was completely filled, especially if we left during the weekend, right? To come back to school to make sure that everything was okay on that. So they did have tasks, and every single day, each child rotated through the tasks, and then from there, the preschoolers, right, the basically preschool, the pre-K kids had a journal that they would actually document in regards to no eggs hatched, everything still looks good. We candled, we threw away one egg or whatever the case is. So they had to document their whole entire journey of whatever they were hatching, whether it was quail or chicks or ducklings. It was a journey process.
You mentioned the kids were checking the eggs with X's. Can you talk a little bit about how you marked the eggs and how they would know what side is up?
Anything can go wrong with an incubator. We all know that, right? So we want to make sure that the rotating mechanism, that if you have one that you're not manually rotating, but if you have one that actually has an automatic rotator in it, is moving efficiently. So you always want to mark one side of your egg with an X. We used a black Sharpie to do that. And then every day they would come in to make sure that the egg was actually rotating. So if the X was on top one day, then before they would leave, they need to make sure that throughout their time that the X was in a different position. So that was part of their journaling process to know that they heard, I mean, they could hear that the rotator move. So they would be like, they would all stop and look up from what they were doing and just hold their breaths a little bit. And then the group that was supposed to journal it at that time would just get up and go make sure that it moved properly. So kids are one of those things that they take ownership so strongly if you give it to them, and that is the key to anything. I mean, incubating eggs especially, because that's a big responsibility, right?
Yes, it is. And I like how you mentioned that journal because if you have 4-year-olds, they're not going to be taking copious notes, but I could
Right.
imagine you printing out a chart for each
Hmm.
of them, and they could even
Exactly.
have like a happy, sad sticker or an X and an O
Correct.
sticker, and they could just be
Absolutely.
filling out that
Yep.
chart. All right. Now, are there any books or internet resources that you like to use as a supplement or, as a go-to to teach kids about hatching chicks or the parts of an egg? Because, like I mentioned, I was teaching middle school, 12 to
Hmm.
14-year-olds, and I would say 5% or less knew if the albumin or the yolk turned into the chick.
You don't get to open up an egg, like a fresh egg, and look at it and go, oh, here's the identifying factor of what it is and what's going to happen. So I think that in regards to books, there are a couple of books out there. I mean, realistically, if you pick up any chicken keeping book at this point in time, it is very detailed. I mean, there's got to be over 30 or 40 chicken keeping books out there right now that actually will break it down for you. And that's just chicken keeping, whether it's keeping chickens naturally or just a basic book on chicken keeping, whatever the case is. The key to it is that when working with the younger children, right? The ones that are really wanting to be like their 10-year-old sister, it's the ability to show them photos, right, of what the book is about. There is nothing that I know of that reaches truly pre-K. Okay. So if you go to pre-K, there's hardly anything. If you're lucky, you can print out a coloring worksheet or something like that, and then make that your group discussion in regards to how you're going to do it, especially if you like homeschool, right? That can be part of your homeschooling curriculum as you go forward. But just about any book that you can pick up anywhere, Tractor Supply, Amazon, any online bookstore at this point in time will definitely show you the anatomy of the egg and the progression of from the day that you collected that egg out of the nesting box and decided to incubate it to hatch day. And it even teaches you, like all those books now teach you, like what was the problem, like what happens when the chick is shrunk wrap into the egg because the membrane dried out on it, things like that. So any book, pick a book, they all have it in there.
All right. So speaking of the development of the eggs, are there some favorite go-to scientific lessons or topics that you like to include while teaching kids about hatching eggs?
I think that the best thing to do is to either create a chart for your family, right? If you're homeschooling, or if, like for us, when I taught preschool, create that chart in something like that. And then you can go online and just print out coloring sheets, print out anatomy sheets, print out all the things that you need, and you go from that direction and move forward. I think that if there is a lesson from a woman who has created, I think, probably one of the best curriculums. But even if you don't homestead, I would suggest you get this because homeschool, because of the simple fact that she's really good. But she has basically it's a homeschool curriculum for people who homeschool. And one of her lesson plans in this particular workbook, you get a workbook of all the lesson plans that you could do for the year and kind of thing like that, is egg incubation. And I mean, they reach every single age level. So even if your children are attending a public school, right, and you're homesteading, I'm going to tell you this book is ideal because you sometimes, we get busy in our lives and we're like, our children are doing everything, but sometimes we're rushing through things and we're like, we don't realize that our children are like missing key elements. So if you're incubating eggs and your children go to a public school, it doesn't have an FFA because our public school in Washington State didn't have an FFA. And so with things like that, I think that as a parent, you could turn around and go, hey, we're going to incubate eggs this summer. And you know what? This is what we're going to do. And then that child who still goes to a public school can still participate and see the process and learn the process of how it goes, not just from, oh, I took this egg, put it in the incubator. Oh, poof, a chick came out, right? There's so much more to it.
Yeah, and I'm coming from the middle school level, and in middle school science, they learn about embryology, the study of embryos,
Mhm.
not just of chicks, but of
Right.
mammals and reptiles, and comparing and contrasting those is like an easy connection if you're hatching,
Hmm.
eggs at home. And also the high school level, you can talk about fertilization, and elementary through high school, you should be talking about the parts of an egg, the parts of a chick, duckling,
Hmm.
biology, lots of things. And then you had mentioned, even the preschoolers were noting the humidity, and that's a great physical
Hmm.
science lesson, humidity and
Right.
temperature of water, and how those things are affected each other.
Easiest way to do that is to have them go stand in the sun. How do you feel when you're standing in the sun? Do you feel hot? Are you sweating? What's going on, right? And then you come in and you explain, okay, this is what happens with the humidity level inside of the incubator. What does it do? Do you feel moist when you're standing outside? Well, inside the egg, when the humidity level is here, this is what you're feeling. And I think that with hatching, and whether you're an adult or a child that wants to venture on this journey, is that it is absolutely incredible when you hold a life, right, basically in the palm of your hands, not realistically, but that you are like waiting for hatching. I've been doing this 10 years, and anytime I incubate, I am like a nervous Nelly in regards to hatch day, because it's like, oh my gosh, is it going to be viable? How much am I going to get? Did I just waste my time? Whatever the case is. But I think that the hardest incubation for me is waterfowl. Right. So waterfowl is one of the ones that you have to put a little bit more focus on. Well, I'll say this. The incubators that I had prior to the incubator that I have now, I had to really pay attention to, because humidity levels on waterfowl shift so drastically, right? And so, like with when I was hatching goose eggs, I would have to I literally would take them out and dip them in water twice a day because my humidity level would not balance properly. But the incubator that I have now is so efficient that you put the eggs in there, you set it, you walk by it a couple times, and you're like, oh, still holding. This is great. Don't have to touch it again after that. I'm good to go. So I think that all of that depends on that. But you teach a lesson that's so valuable to anybody, whether it's an adult or a child. It's sustainability. It's our life. It's what we achieve to do. Yeah.
When you were talking about the waterfowl, and you also had mentioned quail, I was thinking a great comparative anatomy lesson would be between all those different types of poultry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that with it said, when you when you're putting this itty bitty quail egg in there to a massive goose egg in there, right? You turn around and you're like, okay, so what's the same in regards to anatomy of the internal anatomy, especially, right? To that, because they could see externally what the difference is. But when you turn around and you say, okay, I'm going to put in, how do we handle this? What do we do from this point? And then, brooder temperature is completely different for each animal and what we need to do with it. And so I think that there is really, when it comes to this, the whole aspect of it is that this could be one lesson plan that's an everyday work in progress, right? Every day there's something, you will teach something every day. And what happens with children is that they get ownership of it, right? It's no longer, hey, we hatch chicks. It's, hey, I hatch chicks, and things like that. And so we start learning that process a little bit more, and it totally shifts to adult being responsible for teaching our children, to our children taking ownership and saying, okay, mom, we didn't check the incubator before we went to bed. Where are we at? What are we doing? Kind of thing like that. So I think that plays that factor into it. And I think it's just beneficial. But I think it's also important for them to know that quail eggs, chicken eggs, duck eggs, and geese eggs would incubate at different times, different humidity levels, right? And what your anticipation is for what happens through that process.
A big push all across the country is PBL, project-based learning. And this is like an easy project where you
Mhm.
could just come up with so many charts and graphs. You can also, we didn't even mention graphing. You could be graphing the temperature every day as a big chart.
Correct. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'll just give an example. My ewes just lambs, right? But because I didn't do intentional breeding this year because I was traveling a lot, I had a general base idea of when my ewes were going to lamb. But then at that point, you don't have the exact date. So externally, I can look at a couple of things to identify that. But however, when you're putting an egg in there and all of a sudden hatch day comes on this particular day and they're not hatching, people are like, what did I do wrong? Immediately, it's children are like, mommy, what happened? What's going on? Or asking their teachers. And it's like, well, this is the level of just being patient and nature doing nature. Let's give it a good couple of days and see what happens after that. But they're like, no, you said an egg hatches on this date. And how do you teach a child, like, wait, let's back up a little bit. Sometimes due dates are based on, right? And so you're teaching them the anticipation of nature has to fulfill nature in order to move forward and do what it needs to do. But then, of course, then we have to teach that some eggs aren't viable, right? And then you're answering the question of, well, did it die? What happened and things like that. And then you have to resort to, we candled it. It looked great on this day before we went into lockdown. And then, there are some children that will say, I want to see what happened. And then there are some children that don't want to see it all, right? So the child that wants to see what happened, take the egg outside, go ahead away from it where you don't want it to be in case, right? It stinks, and stuff like that. But then, you're having that conversation of, from viable life to death at that point, right? And that's a conversation that, depending on your child and depending on what you're comfortable with, but that is a conversation that we as homesteaders and farmers want to teach our children, right? That anticipation and expectation of things that live do die.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about those emotional lessons that you can implement after the break. But first, I wanted to finish up with the science-based or the science-themed lessons. When you were talking about you allowed the sheep to freely breed, I was thinking some other great lessons for hatching chicks is genetics, Punnett squares, phenotypes, like the physical traits, genotypes, what are their genes,
Yeah, I agree
and
with you. Look, I'm a big believer in barnyard mixes. I really am. I love my barnyard mixes because then we start switching egg color, right? We start switching feather patterns. We start switching, the temperaments even of a bird, right? So I'm a big believer in barnyard mixes. However, I do have certain breeds that I want to keep true. So if your family is teaching, like sustainability on barnyard mixes, then you've got to sit down and break it down, right? Egg color, size of the production of the bird, the feather pattern at that point. How to identify if it's if the breed is auto sexing, how can we determine at that point like what we're looking for? Like a Welsh Harlequin duck is auto sexing, right? And there's certain chicken breeds that are as well too. So teaching them that aspect of it all, I think that the anticipation of them going, oh, this we put all black copper Moran's eggs in there, and this is going to come out looking this way. Oh no, this brooder has barnyard mixes. So let's see what we get. So then you leave the incubator, and then you go forward to documenting from this chick into egg production laying phase of it came out with photos looking like this. And we're documenting, and we're changing, and we're this, and we're that. And then, this is what you're going to get. Maybe a horrible production and egg laying, or a beautiful bright blue egg. You know what I mean? So those are things that we teach them for like longevity purposes, right? And so every flock needs to be freshened, but then that's another topic. We went from incubating to hatching to, your flock still needs to be freshened, or else we still have crossbreeding happening. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it can go on forever.
Yes, it could. I love vocabulary, and I would love to teach the students about heterosis, hybrid vigor, about, you breed this one, and then are they going to have a better egg production than their parents or less? This is like a
Yeah.
long-term lesson now.
Yes, absolutely. How many hen houses do you need if you're going to breed true? Back to all that.
Oh, and then in math class, you could talk about poultry math, about how you think you're going to
Oh,
start with 3 chicks, but then you end up with 25.
absolutely. Never project small, but never project large, because every year you've got to do something, and it just goes from 5 to 25 in a blink of an eye.
Another thing that you could implement while teaching kids about hatching eggs is some social lessons. Are there any specific social lessons that come to mind?
Well, if you participate in 4-H, right, that's the biggest social lesson you're going to get in that sense, right? So you could show, your Cornish crosses, of course, but if you're showing your own private purebred stock, that is going to be one of the things that is absolutely fantastic. But then the other aspect of it is that let me give you an example. Lola sold eggs in Washington as her own business. Okay. So all we did was take her to buy her feed, which she had to buy herself. And then I took her to deliver her eggs, because we delivered them in town. We didn't live in town. And so with her, she had to budget for feed. She had a budget for material costs. She had a budget for gas, because I didn't charge her for my time, but I did charge her for her gas. And then anything else that she net after that was profit to her. Okay. So that took this child, who was social to begin with, outside to be a business person, to say, okay, this is what I need to sell my eggs for. Feed costs went up and things like that. And she was out in her community pitching egg sales to other people. And then on top of that, her friends were like, well, how do you have so much money? And she was in elementary school. How do your friends have so much money? She goes, I sell eggs. And she goes, what do you do? Well, I guess we do chores, but my mom doesn't pay us. You know what I mean? So she's teaching them that you should get a business. So it helps. It does help, social aspect of it.
Very good. Another social lesson I was thinking for little kids is when the chicks are hatching and there's a pecking order being established. You could talk about, why do you think this one
Mm.
is bullying this one? What could we do as a classroom to be nicer to one another?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Those are, yeah, not, I didn't think about that, but that's a good idea.
All right, we're going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsor. And when we return, we're going to talk about some emotional lessons that can be implemented while teaching kids about hatching chicks.
Brinzy products are designed to be long-lasting and energy efficient. Their advanced series incubators and brooders feature the latest state-of-the-art digital control systems, providing instant readings of temperature and humidity to ensure successful hatches and healthy chicks. Check out Brinzy incubators and more at brinzy.com. That's www.brinsea.com.
We're back with Assetta Scott, contributor to Backyard Poultry Magazine. So Ann, how can listeners help kids get comfortable with learning something new or when a problem happens when incubating or hatching?
I think the key point is that patience is a virtue, right? We have to teach our children to be patient through the whole process. I think that, the anticipating of the calendar markdown of when hatch day is going to be, being, the frustration that nothing was viable, right? The frustration that something had died, the sorrow that now what do you do with a potential chick that did not hatch, right? And things like that. I think that the problem solving aspect of it is that for us, for Justin and I, as parents, right, we needed our children to understand the life and death cycles of things. And then on top of that, if you were going to sell your chicks that hatch, right, that your children understand that you can't keep 26 more chickens and that, you did this for a reason, or, a bird dies or whatever the case is. And how do you manage that emotionally? I will say this, the longer you do this, the easier it does become for your children, because then that anticipation has been taught. They have time to absorb it. They have time to live the lessons of it. And then from there, you turn around and you continue. And then what happens is that, it goes from just incubating eggs to other farm animals at that point in time. Like, are they responsible for other larger livestock and things like that? I think that with the whole aspect of the start to finish project, right? From the gathering the egg for incubation, then turning around to having a chick hatch to brooding and stuff like that. I think that it's probably one of the hardest lessons that children are going to learn in life, other than, like you said, of being bullied or being not understood and things like that. I think that this lesson is so nice because it's in your home, where you can guide along a lot better emotions and things like that for your children. So, I mean, maybe I just went off topic of your question, but oh no, okay.
Now that's good. I was just jotting down that I think I agree with you that this lesson or teaching kids about hatching eggs is so impactful. I bet you could ask a handful of adults and all of them would remember when they were in elementary school and they hatched chicks, and then they were allowed to take a couple of ducklings home over the weekend, and they were,
Mhm.
responsible for that. And then that empowered them or engaged them so much that they became, farmers or
Right.
homesteaders when they
Yeah,
were older.
definitely. I mean, even it's a lesson for adults too, right? I mean, nothing worse than you checking an egg and it was fully formed and it didn't hatch. So, and that's a hard one to explain to children. That's that's a hard one. That's a hard one for children, especially. So, yeah.
And yes, nature will hatch the eggs when it deems appropriate. So, 21 days and 12 hours or just on
Yeah.
the verge of 22 days. I was thinking when you were mentioning, marking down the calendar to hatch day, if you are doing this in a classroom, you should try to plan to have them hatch during the week because
Absolutely.
I can only imagine the confusion. You leave Friday and you come Monday and then you have chicks running around and the kids are like, "Did you just buy these?"
The very first time we did it at the school, I counted wrong, and I counted wrong by, like, 2 days. I don't know how I did that. So, yes, it's been done. You will make a mistake, and you will learn very valuable lesson in the faces that are like, "Well, when did they hatch?" And you'll see their faces. So, yes, make sure you count appropriately and double count, even triple count your dates before you set your eggs. Absolutely.
You can have the students double check your counting.
They'll probably count better than you do at the moment in time.
Thank you so much, Anne, for talking to us today about teaching kids about hatching chicks. And we encourage our listeners to implement this at their homestead or at their school, or, just share this information with their teacher friends.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Anne. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Mother Earth News and Friends. To listen to more podcasts and get connected on our social media, visit motherearthnews.com/podcast. You can also email us at podcast@ogdenpubs.com with any questions or suggestions. Our podcast production team includes Jessica Anderson, Kenny Coogan, and Alyssa Warner. Music for this episode is Hustle by Kevin MacLeod. The Mother Earth News and Friends podcast is a production of Ogden Publications. thanks again to Brinzy, our sponsor for this Mother Earth News and Friends podcast episode. You too can experience the Brinzy difference and maximize your hatch rates with Brinzy incubators that monitor temperature and humidity and are made of antimicrobial materials. Brinzy ships worldwide and provides stellar customer support to answer all your questions. Hatch your chicks with Brinzy, the leader in innovative incubation research. Learn more at brinzy.com. Again, that's www.brinsea.com. Until next time, don't forget to love your mother.